My manager announced my layoff in the middle of the team meeting and laughed when I went quiet. I cleared my desk without a word. She had no idea I'd signed my new contract that morning with her biggest client. I want to tell you about the pen. It was a matte black rollerball. Nothing expensive, the kind you buy in a 3-pack and don't think about until one of them writes something that changes everything. I'd had it in my jacket pocket since 7:40 that morning, when I'd signed 6 pages of a contract in a glass-walled conference room 17 floors above the street with a man named Gerald Ashby sitting across from me saying, "We're glad you're coming aboard," and meaning it. The pen was still in my pocket 2 hours later, when my manager, Diane, announced in front of 11 of my colleagues that my position had been eliminated, effective immediately, and then laughed. Not a big laugh, a small one. A compressed, involuntary sound she made when she saw my face go still. The kind of laugh that escapes a person who finds someone else's shock privately amusing. She covered it with a cough, but I heard it. Everyone in that room heard it. I touched the pen through the fabric of my jacket pocket just once and said nothing. I want to give you the full picture, because the full picture is the only way the ending makes sense. My name is Sasha. I'm 31. I spent 4 years at a mid-size marketing agency called Meridian Group, working as a senior account strategist, which is a title that sounds more defined than it is. In practice, it meant I was the person who kept the clients calm, kept the campaigns on schedule, and kept the creative team from promising things the budget couldn't deliver. I was the connective tissue of a department that would have torn itself apart without someone holding the seams together. I was good at it. Not in the way people say they're good at things to sound impressive. I mean, I was measurably, documentably good at it, in the way that shows up in client retention numbers and renewal rates and the specific relief on a client's face when they get on a call and hear your voice instead of someone else's. My biggest account was a company called Renford Consumer Brands. They made household products, mostly in the cleaning and personal care space, mid-market, nothing glamorous, but they were Meridian's single largest client, a $4.2 million annual contract that had been renewed 3 consecutive years running, each time with an expanded scope, each time on the strength of a relationship that I had personally built and maintained from the ground up. Renford had come to Meridian as a modest account 4 years ago, before I was hired. At that point, they were billing around $800,000 a year. Their primary contact at the agency had been a senior director named Paul, who had managed the relationship in the way that certain account managers manage relationships, responsively rather than proactively, which is a polite way of saying he responded to problems after they arrived instead of before. When I was assigned to Renford 18 months into my tenure, it was described to me as a holding action. The client was frustrated. The renewal was uncertain. My manager, Diane, who had been at Meridian for 11 years and had the institutional authority that tenure provides even when talent doesn't fully support it, handed me the file with the energy of someone transferring a problem rather than an opportunity. "Good luck," she said. "They're difficult." They weren't difficult. They were underserved. There is a difference that matters enormously in this industry, and the inability to tell them apart is how agencies lose clients they never had to lose. I spent the first month just listening. I talked to their marketing director, a methodical man named Gerald Ashby, every week, not to pitch or present or propose, just to understand what they actually needed versus what they'd been getting. Gerald was the kind of client who had long ago accepted that vendors would overpromise and underdeliver, and had built a professional stoicism around that expectation. By the end of our first real conversation, I could tell he was waiting for the part where I told him what we could do for him. I skipped that part and asked him instead what had most disappointed him about the last 2 years. He talked for 40 minutes. I took notes on everything and acted on most of it within 60 days. Not grand gestures, specific things. A reporting format that actually matched how their internal team presented data. A campaign calendar that synced with their retail partner deadlines instead of ours. A creative process that stopped treating their feedback as an obstacle and started treating it as a specification. Small changes, precisely targeted, that told Gerald and his team that someone was paying attention to the actual shape of their business instead of just their invoice. The renewal came in 3 months later at $1.6 million. Gerald sent me a card, an actual card, handwritten, which is so rare in this industry that my colleague Marcus photographed it and put it on our team Slack with fire emojis. By year 2, it was $2.9 million. By year 3, it was $4.2 million, and Renford had begun referring Meridian to 2 of their partner companies, which had generated an additional $900,000 in new business that Diane presented at the company all hands as a result of the agency's strong market reputation. She did not mention my name. I noticed. I told myself it was an oversight. I should tell you about Diane properly, because she is not a villain in the way stories usually have villains. She didn't scheme or plot. She was simply a person who had risen to a level of authority that she protected through a specific and consistent mechanism, which was the careful management of credit, other people's credit specifically. The credit for work that moved through her department flowed upward to leadership with her name attached, and downward to the people who'd done it in the form of positive performance reviews that were warm but vague, the kind that feel like praise but contain nothing you could take to a negotiation. I had 3 of those reviews. Each one said some version of Sasha is a valuable member of the team who has demonstrated strong client relationship skills. No numbers, no specifics, nothing that would survive contact with a competing offer. I asked for a raise after the second Renford renewal. Diane said the budget cycle was closed, but she'd flag it for Q1. In Q1, she said the company was in a conservative period. In the conservative period, she bought herself a new car that I know about because she mentioned it at the holiday party while standing next to the catering table that was smaller than the previous years because of budget constraints. I started keeping a document, not a revenge document, a record. Dates, conversations, commitments made and not kept, client outcomes with specific revenue figures attached to specific actions I had taken. A professional record of my own work, the kind you keep when you begin to understand that no one else is keeping it for you. I'd started it quietly, without a plan, just a growing instinct that the work should exist somewhere in writing with my name on it. That document turned out to matter more than I knew. 8 months ago, Gerald Ashby called me directly, not through the agency system, on my cell phone, which he had because I'd given it to him 2 years earlier with a casual confidence of someone who doesn't imagine that professional relationships end. He asked if I had 30 minutes. I said yes. He said he wanted to talk about something unrelated to the current campaign. I said of course. Renford was building an in-house marketing function, he said. They'd been growing fast enough that the external agency model model was starting to limit them more than it served them. They were looking to bring their strategy work internal, and they wanted to build the team around someone who already understood the brand at a deep level, someone who could step into a leadership role and build something from scratch. He paused. We'd like that person to be you, Sasha, if you're open to it. I was standing in my kitchen when he said this, and I set down the coffee mug I was holding very carefully on the counter and said, tell me more. The conversations that followed happened over 6 weeks, quietly, after hours, in the way that serious professional conversations happen when both parties understand the stakes of discretion. Gerald introduced me to Renford's chief marketing officer, a sharp woman named Priya, who asked hard questions and seemed satisfied by the answers. I sent them my record document, reformatted as a portfolio. Every campaign outcome, every revenue figure, every initiative with my name and a date. Priya read it and emailed me one line. This is exactly what we were hoping to see. The offer came on a Wednesday evening. Director of Brand Strategy. Salary that was 60% above what I was making at Meridian. Equity in a company on a genuine growth trajectory. A team I would hire myself from scratch with real budget and real authority, and a reporting line that went directly to Priya. I asked for a week to review it. They gave me 10 days. I did not tell Diane. I did not tell anyone at Meridian. I called my sister, who is a corporate attorney, and she reviewed the contract language over a weekend and said, it's clean, Sasha, just sign it. I called my mentor from graduate school, who had watched my career from a careful distance for 9 years, and he said, do not negotiate yourself out of this. Take the number, take the title, go. I signed the contract on a Thursday morning at 7:40 a.m. in a glass-walled conference room at Renford's offices with Gerald and Priya across the table and a matte black rollerball pen I'd taken from a cup on the table without thinking about it. Gerald said, we're glad you're coming aboard. Priya said, we've been hoping you'd say yes for longer than we've been allowed to say so. I put the pen in my jacket pocket. I drove to Meridian's office. I arrived at 9:15. Our team meeting was at 10 o'clock. I had planned to speak with Diane privately before the end of the day to give my notice professionally, to handle the transition cleanly. I had a resignation letter drafted on my phone. I had thought about what to say. I did not get the chance to say it. The meeting started the way team meetings always started. Diane at the head of the table with her laptop open. Marcus and the creative team on the left side. The account team filling in around the right. There were 11 of us plus Diane. The agenda was the usual structure, campaign updates, client status, resource planning for the coming quarter. We were 20 minutes in when Diane said, before we move to Q3 planning, I want to address a structural change that's effective immediately. I looked up from my notebook. Due to a realignment of our account management model, she said, Sasha's position is being eliminated. The room went very quiet in a specific way. The particular silence of people who are processing something unexpected while simultaneously trying not to show that they're processing it. I felt 11 pairs of eyes find me and then look carefully away. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I went still in the way I go still when something large and fast is moving toward me. A focused, concentrated stillness that looks like shock from the outside. And Diane laughed. It was small. One compressed sound, immediately swallowed. But it came from something real. Some involuntary flicker of satisfaction at my stillness. At the sight of me receiving a blow without warning in a room full of witnesses. She covered it with a cough and kept talking. Transition timeline. HR would be in touch. All very procedural. And I sat there with my hands flat on the table and my jaw set and the pen in my jacket pocket and thought about Gerald saying, we're glad you're coming aboard. She finished speaking. There was a pause where I understood I was being offered the chance to respond, to ask questions, to express something she could manage. I said nothing. She moved on to Q3 planning. I sat through the rest of the meeting without speaking, which took 22 minutes and felt like a practical demonstration of something I'd been learning to do for 4 years, which was to hold very still while deciding very clearly what happened next. After the meeting ended, I went to my desk. I had a cardboard box I'd kept folded flat in my bottom drawer since the previous December when a colleague named Ren had been let go, and I'd watched her scramble to find something to put her things in. I'd kept a box since then, not because I expected this, because I had understood since Ren's layoff that the expectation of permanence in a place like this was a luxury I couldn't afford. I packed in 11 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when I started and checked it again when I finished, not for any particular reason, just the way you notice time when you're being very deliberate. I took my notebooks, my desk lamp, a framed photo of my sister's dog, a small wooden dish I used for paper clips that had been my grandmother's, and the charger I'd bought myself because the company issued ones were unreliable. I left a branded Meridian mug. I left a branded Meridian notepad. I left everything that had their name on it. Several colleagues passed my desk while I packed. Marcus stopped and stood for a moment and said, Sasha, I'm sorry, in a low voice, and I looked at him and said I'm okay and meant it, and I think he could tell, because he looked at me with an expression that was more curious than pitying. A few others said nothing but communicated things with their body language, the elaborate pantomime of office solidarity conducted just out of management's sightline. Diane did not come to my desk. HR sent someone named Kim, who was professional and thorough and clearly following a script that had been prepared without much knowledge of the specific situation. She gave me paperwork. She explained the severance, 2 weeks per year of service, so 8 weeks total, which I accepted without negotiating because I had a contract in my pocket that made the number irrelevant. She told me I'd be contacted about returning my laptop. I said of course. She asked if I had any questions. I said not at this time. I carried the box to my car. I put it in the trunk. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my phone and sent one text to Gerald Ashby that said, I'll see you Monday. He replied in 4 minutes, looking forward to it. Then a second message, everything okay? And I wrote back, yes. As of about an hour ago, better than expected. He sent a single word back, good. I drove home. I made lunch. I called my sister and told her the whole story, the meeting, the laugh, the box, the 11 minutes. She was quiet for a moment and then said, so she fired you 4 days before you were going to quit anyway. I said essentially, yes. She said, Sasha, that is genuinely perfect. I said, I know. She said, what are you going to do? I said, nothing. I'm going to do nothing at all. She said, that's the right answer. It was. Here is what I did not know was already in motion on the day I packed my box. Renford's contract with Meridian had a renewal window that opened every October. Meridian's leadership knew in a general way that the relationship was strong and expected the renewal to proceed as it had the previous 3 years. What they did not know, because I had not told anyone, and Gerald had had not told anyone, and discretion is a thing that serious professionals maintain, was that Renford had been in conversations with me for 6 weeks about bringing their strategy work entirely in-house, which meant that when the October renewal window opened, Renford was not going to renew. A $4.2 million contract was about to leave Meridian, and the person who had built, maintained, and grown that contract from $800,000 to $4.2 million had been walked out of the building with a cardboard box 4 days before she was going to resign anyway. The timing was not my doing. I want to be clear about that. Gerald had been planning the in-house transition for months, on Renford's own timeline, for Renford's own strategic reasons. My departure from Meridian was something Diane had chosen on her own, for her own reasons, which I eventually understood had to do with a restructuring she was implementing to flatten the account team and absorb the senior roles into her own direct management. She had not anticipated losing Renford. She had not thought to ask whether the person she was eliminating had a relationship with a client that existed independently of the agency. She had not thought about it because she had never really looked at how the relationship worked. She had received the revenue numbers and the renewal confirmations and the referrals and presented them as outcomes of the agency's strength. She had never looked closely enough to see whose hands were actually holding it together. That was the thing about Diane. She managed the credits so carefully that she'd stopped being able to see the work. I started at Renford the following Monday. My office had a window that faced east. Priya had arranged a small welcome setup on my desk. Nothing elaborate, a coffee, a notepad, a card signed by the people I'd be managing. Gerald knocked on the door frame at 9 and said, "Good morning," and I said, "Good morning," and we both understood without saying it that something had arrived exactly where it was supposed to be. The first 2 weeks were the specific productive chaos of starting something new. I was building a team, reviewing existing vendor relationships, mapping the brand architecture I'd been analyzing from the outside for 3 years and now had access to from the inside. I worked long hours and came home tired in the way that good work makes you tired, not depleted but emptied in a way that fills back up overnight. I did not think about Meridian very much. Occasionally I thought about the meeting, the room going quiet, the laugh, my hands flat on the table. I thought about it the way you think about a thing that hurt but that you've moved past, with a kind of clear-eyed distance, without the heat it would have had in the moment. Then, on a Wednesday morning in my 3rd week, Gerald knocked on my doorframe again and came in and sat down in the chair across from my desk and said, "Sasha, I have to tell you something." His expression was the one he used when he was about to deliver information he found uncomfortable. "I spoke to someone from Meridian last Friday," he said. "Their head of client services. They reached out when they got our non-renewal notice." I nodded. He said, "They asked if our decision was connected to a personnel change on their side." I told him that our decision to build an in-house team had been in development for some time, and that we were grateful for the partnership over the years. He paused. Then he asked me if I knew where you had gone. I told him I couldn't speak to the employment decisions of other companies. He thanked me and hung up. Gerald folded his hands on his knee. About 40 minutes later, I received a call from a woman named Diane. I held very still. "She asked me," Gerald said carefully, "whether Renford's non-renewal was connected to your departure." I told her the same thing I told his colleague. "She then asked whether you were currently employed by Renford." I told her that our employee information was private. She asked me to confirm or deny. I told her I wasn't in a position to do that and wished her well. He looked at me. The call lasted about 4 minutes. She sounded, he said, choosing the word with precision, rattled. I thought about the meeting. 11 colleagues, the quiet, the laugh. I said, "Thank you for telling me, Gerald." He said, "I thought you should know." Then he stood up, smoothed his jacket and said, "Good work on the agency review, by the way. The recommendation on the media buying vendor is solid." And he walked back out. Diane called my cell phone that same evening. I stared at her name on the screen through the full length of the ring. Then I let it go to voicemail. The message was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. I know because the voicemail timer told me before I listened to it. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said she'd been thinking about the transition and wanted to make sure it had been handled in a way that felt respectful. She said she understood if I had questions about the decision. She said, at the end, in a tone that had lost some of its usual management register, that she hoped there were no hard feelings. Hard feelings. I sat with that phrase for a moment, thought about what it meant to describe something like that as feelings. As if the room and the quiet and the laugh were an emotional event rather than a professional one. As if the appropriate response was softness rather than record-keeping. I didn't call her back. I had nothing to say to Diane that would serve any purpose I cared about. She wasn't going to understand something she'd been structurally incapable of seeing for 4 years. She wasn't going to apologize in a way that cost her anything real. And I didn't need an apology. I had a contract signed with a matte black rollerball pen on a Thursday morning, 2 hours before she'd laughed in a conference room. The sequence had already written itself. I heard through Marcus, who texted me about 6 weeks later, that Meridian had lost 2 other accounts in the quarter following Renford's non-renewal. Not because of me, because losing $4.2 million in annualized revenue from your anchor client does structural damage to an agency that doesn't show up all at once. It shows up in the conservative decisions and the delayed hires and the quiet recalibration of what you can promise in a pitch meeting. The ripple effect of one departure through a business that had been built around it without acknowledging it. Marcus also said that Diane had been moved out of her senior director role into a client advisory position, which is a title that sounds lateral and is not. He said it in a text that contained no editorial comment, just the information, which was its own kind of comment. I thanked him and wished him well and meant it, and then I put my phone down and went back to the brand strategy deck I was building, the one with my name at the bottom and a reporting line that went directly to the CMO and a team I had hired myself from scratch with real budget and real authority. I still have the pen. It's in the top drawer of my desk, the one that faces east, the one with a window. I don't use it for anything in particular. I keep it because it was the first object I touched on the morning everything changed, before the meeting, before the quiet, before the laugh, before the box. It was in my pocket the whole time. I think about that sometimes, what it means to be carrying the thing that changes your life while someone is trying to make you feel small. You usually are, I think, carrying it. Most people just don't know it yet. I started at Renford on a Monday. On the Thursday of that first week, I had a one-on-one with Priya to walk through my 90-day plan. She read it carefully, asked 3 questions that told me she'd actually read it and not just skimmed. And at the end, she said, "This is good, Sasha. This is what we hired you to build." Then she said, "I heard from Gerald that your departure from the previous firm was abrupt." I said, "Yes, somewhat. She said, "They're lost," in a tone that closed the subject cleanly and moved on to the next item. "They're lost." 2 words. Accurate and complete and not interested in elaborating. I thought a lot about what I would tell someone who finds themselves in the version of this story that hasn't ended yet. Still in the meeting, still sitting with their hands flat on the table, still holding the stillness while someone misreads it as shock. I think I would tell them to keep the record, document the work, know what it's worth, and put the numbers somewhere with your name on them. Not out of bitterness. Out of the basic professional discipline of understanding the value of what you do well enough that no one else gets to define it for you. And I would tell them, the laugh means they see the stillness and mistake it for devastation. They don't know about the pen. They don't know what you signed that morning. They're reading a face and drawing a conclusion about what that face means, and they're wrong, and you don't owe them the correction. The correction takes care of itself. Gerald told me months later over coffee in my office that the thing that had made him want to bring me in-house, the thing that had started the conversation in his mind long before he picked up the phone, was a moment from about 2 years earlier. We'd been on a call with his team and something had gone sideways on the creative deliverable, a timing issue, a missed brief, something that was clearly not my fault and that I could have easily attributed to the agency process. Instead, he said, I had taken responsibility, outlined exactly what had gone wrong, explained how I was fixing it, and moved on without making it a bigger moment than it was. He said, I thought, this person does not perform under pressure. She just works. That's very rare. I thought about Diane's laugh, about what she'd seen in my stillness and what she'd decided it meant, about the gap between what someone performs and what they actually are, and how that gap tends to close, eventually, in the direction of the truth. We finished our coffee. Gerald went back to his office. I turned back to my desk, to the brand strategy that had my name on it, and I opened my laptop and I worked. The pen was in the top drawer. I didn't need it for anything. I already knew what I'd signed.